everyone. Dan Goodstein here. Welcome to the first ever Digital Leaders Show. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited. I've been wanting to start this show for a while and excited to share this with you. Our goal each week is to explore some of the key issues and news of the day, focused around our ongoing transformation into digital enterprises and society. So sort of the intersection of business, technology, and the humanities. And our hope is to help you become a better digital leader. We're live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, but the recording will be available on major podcast platforms next week. I'm Dan Goodstein. I run a few professional associations you may know of, the Institute for RPA and AI, as well as the Digital Enterprise Institute. I'm a digital transformation evangelist and fan, and a go-to-market advisor for a variety of firms, including an applied science and data analytics firm. My co-host is Carlos Alvarenga. He's a recognized researcher, author, and educator. Carlos, welcome, and share your background with the people.
Dan, good afternoon. Great to be here. Hi, everybody. Carlos Alvarenga. Started my career as a journalist, then transitioned into management consulting at a very early stage. Went out to become a partner at Accenture and at Ernst & Young. Left consulting a few years ago. Joined a private CXO network called World 50, which is a private group for about 1,500 chief something officers around the world. Left that role and have been an independent researcher and author. In addition, I'm on the faculty at the University of Maryland Business School and at Georgetown University and McDonough School of Business. Great to be here, Dan.
No, great. Thanks for agreeing to do this show with us. And you and I have been having a lot of interesting conversations over the, I think, couple of years, right? I think we met around the beginning of the pandemic, and hopefully we can get some value to those watching, just listening into some of these conversations and talking about what's going on in our industry and the news, both from a business standpoint, a tech standpoint, just like I mentioned before, just a human standpoint, right? So we decided to start this week, and our plan is to cover a bunch of different topics each week, but let's face it, Carlos, the workforce is a mess right now, right? I mean, there's huge turnover in organizations. There's a lot of unfilled jobs, seemingly less people interested in working at all. So let me throw some stats at you, right? Unemployment in the U.S. is at the lowest rate since 1968. Fortune says that 4.5 million Americans quit their jobs in March alone. And the available open positions has gone up to 11.5 million. I can't even understand that number, 11.5 million open jobs. Wall Street Journal says 3 million people who dropped out of the workforce during the pandemic have no plan to come back. And that's based on some research out of Stanford. And according to an economist at the University of Minnesota, Americans are experiencing the highest level of job security on multiple measures. So, start us off. You have a foot in the education space. You've researched and written quite about a bit in this area. What do you think is going on?
Well, I saw today on Bloomberg Television that there were 2 to 3 job openings for every American, but I think that's a little bit of a misleading statistic, right, Dan? Because there's a reason why people aren't going back, and there was the question of how was this pandemic going to change work, and it certainly has. The thing that struck me this week was reading the New York Times story about how the new wave of unionization taking place at Amazon and at Starbucks is being led by not the traditional blue collar worker, but by college educated kids who went to college, ran up huge bills, and then find themselves working in retail or in a service sector job, which they may have thought was temporary when they first graduated, and are suddenly realizing, hey, wait a minute, this isn't a 2 or 3 year gig. I may be here for a decade. If I'm going to be here for a decade, I need to change the way things work. At the same time, you have a company that has, you mentioned, the company has dozens and dozens of AI jobs, technology jobs going vacant. They can't find the people. So we have this strange divergence, I think, between the haves and have-nots when it comes to labor, right? There are tons of jobs for an ever increasingly narrow skill set. And there's a whole workforce just coming out of higher education that can't find the kinds of roles it thought and expected to have when they graduated. And this is, frankly, I think it's the fault of the educational system, right? It's not preparing these young folks for the world they're going into.
I don't want to blame you. You're an academic.
I think the system is completely broken. I've said that it's been around for 1,000 years and it's overdue for an overhaul. And the way in which education is marketed as a product, the way it's sold, the way it's labeled, it fails in two ways, in my opinion. First of all, it fails because it doesn't provide the the working world what it needs, but it also fails the students in many cases because they're told to expect something or to believe something, and they crash into this hard reality. When it's bad enough crashing when you don't owe any money 20 years ago, it's really bad crashing and you've got 50, 60K worth of debt or more in some cases that you have to repay.
I have friends, I have family that, were just not on that path, right? And we're kind of forced into that path. And I still wonder, if their careers, their lives would have been different, right? If they weren't pushed down, the common, acceptable, path. But what you're talking about is something that, resonated with me even pre-pandemic years ago. There was a stat that came out, about the mismatch between college graduates and employer needs. And the stat came out and said that particular year, whatever it was, this is probably 4 or 5 years back now, but that particular graduating class was the least employable graduating class in generations, right? But how does that happen, right? How does the educational institutions out there not have any connection to the business world? Because I can tell you, and again, this is pre-pandemic, but it's only got exacerbated in the last couple of years. There's vendors on our network, our association, that have built training programs, essentially their own schools, to educate people to hire them because they're not getting what they need out of the traditional institutions.
I think sometimes, honestly, it's a lack of being upfront with students when they join. Let's talk about someone who comes in and studies, let's just say, English for 4 years, right? First of all, they're told they're getting a liberal arts degree. In my opinion, they're not. They're getting an English degree. A liberal arts degree, it should be something different. I've argued this in my own alma mater and also at the school where I'm on the faculty, that a liberal arts degree is an idea that goes back thousands of years. And it meant that it was someone who knew everything they needed to know to be a productive citizen in society, right? Today, and the case that I've made is that to be a liberal arts major, you should study chemistry, you should study computer programming, you should study genetics. These are the things that economics, for example. So that you went to college and and left without understanding how chemistry works, how genetics work, how the market work. These kinds of outcomes, right, are happening because people are told, don't worry about it. Get your degree in English, and then somehow you're going to find a way to wind up working in a good job. Now, maybe, I don't know, in the 50s and 60s that happened, but it's very hard to happen today. The barrier to entry in any job that involves programming, mathematics, AI is way beyond what a student has. So then this person has a choice. Okay, I can accept the fact and take a job that isn't what I wanted, or I can double down and get a master's degree. There was a great piece a few months ago that I read about some of the best schools that are loading up kids with second degrees and just double down, right? Well, you know what? If you had a master's degree in history, then everything would be okay. So great, let me load up another 60K on you, and then everything will be fine. So I think there's greed on the part of some of the schools. I think there's a lack of honesty on the part of some of the faculty, maybe some naivete in front of the students. And in the meantime, the company just sit back and watch this happen and continue to post job after job for which the right people do not apply because they don't exist.
Yeah, and I want to spend time on the positive and try to find some of the potential solutions. Talk about some of the potential solutions with you. But I have to wonder, from a business standpoint, if from a business standpoint for some of these universities, how do they continue to justify their value? I mean, I assume there's certain industries, professionals that the name of the university still determines what type of job opportunities you have. I would argue largely in technology, I don't think that's the case anymore. And again, you look at a post-pandemic world where even the Ivy League schools. So when I say post-pandemic, I mean just since the pandemic has happened, right? I realize we're in different phases of it depending on where you in the world you are, but even the Ivy League schools were doing remote education that didn't look that different than some of the online courses that you see, advertised. And at first you say, okay, well, what's the credibility? What's the pedigree of the people teaching these courses? But there's been some really interesting platforms that have emerged. Up from like a master class type of thing where you have like celebrity level people, teaching acting or whatever, down to, people in business, running businesses who are actually hiring and looking for people for jobs who are actually providing this education. So where's the value come from?
I think eventually, if the schools don't address this, we'll go back to the old system of company schools, right? There were times where corporations had, quote unquote, GM University, Motorola University. There was a role for the companies to sort of finish the educational process. In many cases, we may return to that, or we may find a world where CVs don't really matter. I know Google is one. There are other companies that have gone to kind of skills-based hiring. So you pass a certain test, and then that gets you an interview. To me, that's actually a pretty nice model where it doesn't matter what school's on your resume, it doesn't matter, right, what classes you took. If you can pass this test, you can, especially for very technical jobs, if you can complete the task that we need you to complete, then everything else is just a label, right? A CV was a stand-in because it was difficult to assess a young person. So you said, okay, you must be smart because you went to school A, B, or C, or because you took this particular class. But in many cases, unfortunately, it's become devalued. And so we're better off assessing what can you practically do. And that becomes the standard by which you get hired or do not get hired.
Yeah. So we are live, and if you have any comments or questions, our goal is really to make this a conversation each week, and we'd love your input and advice, especially as we're doing this for the first time. Darren's talking about how kind of all schools aren't created equal. How do you? Why is this, Carlos? And what do you think is the solution, or better yet, how about for all those people out there that have college bound kids or on the track towards college, and maybe we focus on technology for the purposes of this part. What's your advice? What characteristics should they look for? Should they just dump the traditional route? You're in it, right? So what's your advice?
Well, I gave it to my son. He's a freshman in college, and he's a journalism major, studying sports journalism. And what I told him was this: I had a friend at Accenture used to say, in the future, there are only two kinds of people: those who know math and those who work for the people who know math. And I think it's funny, but we're sort of headed in that direction. And I told him this joke, and I said, the most hireable journalists are data journalists today, including in sports. So while you're in school, yes, do the broadcasting, do the things that we think of when we think about a sports broadcaster, but take the statistics, right? Take it as far as you can take it, and understand that being a mathematically savvy and literate person will be key to any job that I can think of you're going to have in the future. This is what I would be saying to anyone who's a freshman in college in any particular field. I was a classics major, humanities. That doesn't mean that I don't understand. I don't need to understand physics or chemistry or math. And I think this is the key thing. You have to understand this is where the world is headed. And this becomes a part of what you must know to be an educated person. And somebody mentioned the issue of digitizing curriculum. I think that's part of the problem. I think the schools still refuse to understand or want to understand this is what is required for you to walk into a job at the best companies, right, and be productive on day one. In the old days, they would give you a chance without it. Today, maybe what we're seeing is that world has passed, or at least in some places.
The only reason why, and I guess for me, I wasn't trying to become an attorney. I wasn't trying to become a politician. The big schools didn't. Not that I was going to get into an Ivy League school anyway, but the big schools didn't give me the same allure. I mean, I picked my college because they said something like, we have a 95% placement rate.
Huh.
Right? If you graduate with this degree, my background was computer science and business systems. We line up an intern. It was a small school. You line up an internship, and you're probably going to get that job unless you screw it up, right? Now, I didn't end up going into that field directly. I indirectly have come back to it through the media and the association, and I'm back in technology. I realized a long time ago that I was better at the business side of technology than the technology side of technology, but the advice I give people is, if you're going to go that route, it's kind of like you kind of implied, inferred the whole liberal arts thing. There's, maybe there's some character building in there. Maybe there's, do I think college made me a better human being? I do. I think it did. But are colleges pushing out people that are, employable? I don't know that they are. So my advice is, get a job, get an internship, work for somebody, get into it, right? Don't just go to school, so to speak, but be students, across multiple areas. And if you can, intern with somebody or get a job or take career training, take online training, whatever you got to do to be, very versatile. And then, have sort of a portfolio, right? Just like anything else, have a portfolio of things that you can go into, that you can jump into or pivot to based on the things you've done.
And we'll see what happens sort of socially in the US compared to Europe. One of the things I used to always mention was that if you're going to talk to a chief something officer in Europe, you could almost predict with certainty what was on their CV. In other words, you're talking to a German chief procurement officer, I could pretty much tell you, right, this is what they did in college, this is what they did after college. A lot of them have PhDs, and there wasn't a lot of variability in a path someone took to become a CIO or to become head of marketing. One of the great things about the US, I always thought, was that it wasn't so rigid. There was some flexibility. You can meet a CIO who wasn't necessarily a technologist, right? There were ways to pivot in your career. Unfortunately, I think with the digitization of the enterprise and the way technology moves today, I wonder if that'll be the case sort of 10 years from now.
Yeah.
We're saying for you to, it's so complicated, there's so much going on that for you to have this role, you have to follow this path, right? And this is Chris is making this point. I think analytics should be, of course, required for all students. I couldn't agree more. Again, it goes back to being mathematically literate as a prerequisite for getting a college degree in this country. In the majority of things, right? Maybe not if you're a dancer, okay? But I think for anyone who's looking for a typical business sort of career afterwards, I couldn't agree more with what Chris is saying.
Yeah, I argue this all the time. I think, well, let's stop beating up on education for a moment, because I want to get to the business side of this, right? So you could argue that, so maybe that system is broken, but nonetheless, there's a whole lot of open jobs right now. It's really more the employers, struggling, even I think, to retain, good talent. And so much of that is, I think, based on, well, my opinion. I'm fortunate to speak to a lot of people on our network, but and obviously we're a bit biased because we often deal with outsourcing and AI and data science. But I think people are just kind of done with with a lot of their jobs, right? The repetitive, menial, kind of work that really you don't really need people to do. And these companies, I think, have waited too long to transition some of the technology, some of the people, into different jobs, and allow the technology to take hold, within the organization. And the ironic part is, a lot of them, I think, hesitated to do it because of potential people and HR reasons, and now they're kind of paying the price because they didn't make this move. They didn't move quickly enough. They didn't automate. They didn't leverage innovation enough, and now they can't hire people. Look at beginning of pandemic, just the move to remote work, right? Some organizations transitioned in a week, right? Most organizations still haven't transitioned, and and they said, the ones that said that they did, a lot of those people don't work there anymore.
Mhm. And it's interesting because now that we sort of go back and we read every day about the mass resignation or the pushback against kind of going back, I find it kind of interesting, right? Because there is uh, this sort of movement now to a kind of different way of working, and how will it change work? There is something about the collective experience of being on a campus, or, or being in an office, and how is that changing, right? What are people going to want when they go back, if they go back, and what are companies doing to try to sort of reinvent the workspace, which is always being reinvented, right? You go back and look at Mad Men, and you look at the office space in the 60s, and every decade or so it becomes kind of a new thing. And there was a great piece years ago about how office design always reflects our conception of capitalism, right? And so if you look at how business is changing the office space today, you ask, so what does it say about what we think of work? How is work itself changing kind of post pandemic? And maybe what's happened to some extent is that people who were on the margin, people whose jobs weren't that great, the reward just isn't there. They'll find some other way to exist rather than to return. And then it's up to companies to decide whether we care about that, or we don't. Sure, if you're an AI engineer, everybody wants you, but the people who aren't, what do they fit to all of this?
But I thought you thought I thought you had some data that the Great Resignation wasn't real.
I think it's under debate, but the last few things I've read is that it was overstated, that it really wasn't as bad as it was. A lot of people were just retiring, for example, or just didn't want to come back to work. So, but again, the narrative has been there's been this great resignation. I've seen some early studies that say that may have been overstated, that it really isn't the case. But you would know better than I do. You talk to executives every day. What are they telling you?
Yeah, no, there's definitely fallout, right? The question is why. The common anecdote is, you know, enough is enough. Life is too short. I think it's less about. I quite honestly think it's less about I'm afraid to go to work. Maybe if you travel a lot, internationally. But the people that traveled internationally, I find most of them are happy to be traveling again, right? They liked the travel. They like the travel. So I don't think it's as much of that. Okay, maybe they realized I don't need to be on a plane 49 weeks out of the year. But they'd certainly like to be on a plane 12 times a year or 20 times a year more than they are now, or they have been the last couple of years. So I don't buy the, for the majority. I don't buy the whole I'm afraid to go, right? Yeah, I think it's more, hey, I realized I have a family. I want to spend more time with my family. It's what we used to call a work-life balance, which was kind of a misnomer that really exists, but for most people, and it's like, hey, I can do a lot of the same things that I did in person, remotely, and I can spend time with my family. I mean, you look at the amount of hours that people spend working.
Yeah.
For a long time, it just increased and increased and increased. Now you look at some of the numbers. I don't. That's one of those stats I didn't pull up, but the number of hours that the average worker works has actually gone down, right? And so, is that technology, or is that just people, not being as efficient, or focused? There was a stat, a couple of years ago, 85% of employees are not engaged at work. So, productivity, maybe it's productivity going down. I think we have this old um, model in our heads, a lot of us, that hours equals output, right? Which is not necessarily the case. And I think there's been some stats recently, that stat about 85% of employees not being engaged. By the way, the economic consequence of that, according to the study, was $7 trillion in lost productivity, and that was before the pandemic, right? So I think organizations and people need to decouple time with productivity, especially where we are in the world as it relates to automation and AI.
Well, it's funny to me how so much of work today looks like work when I started in consulting. We were all virtual. The partners switched offices every Friday when they were in. Nobody wanted to see you in the office Monday through Thursday because that meant that you weren't billing someplace, right? We were always on planes. Like you say, we travel all the time. Your title didn't matter. No one, and the advice I used to get was, no one cares whether you're working this for an hour or 100. It's either good or it's not good, right? The deliverable, the deadline is the only thing you need to worry about, the two Ds. And so more and more work looks like that. And it's a strange thing because then you say, okay, well, how do you lead through that? How do you build the culture? And the firms like McKinsey and Accenture and others, they've had decades, be a century to be able to learn how to build culture when all of your employees are not just remote, they're remote at someone else's company. And yet
Yeah.
you do find that. I think that's the interesting challenge to the leader. You say, well, okay, you're going to be in the office 2 days a week in some less structured way. Maybe a majority of your hours will not be here. And to your point, we're not even going to count them anymore because that can't become the proxy for whether you're an efficient or a productive employee. Then, okay, what does it mean to lead in that environment? What is culture? And I think back to your point about people who transitioned in the pandemic. One of the things that I kept hearing about from people who were working was what happens to quote unquote the culture. Now, the culture might have been good or it might have been bad, but it was the culture. I'm really curious to think about how then do you instill and what role does quote unquote corporate culture play if most of your people are not physically in the same space anymore? What defines it? And as a leader, how do you create it? How do you shape it? How do you instill it in the team? Especially if you're working with a lot of, back to the recent college graduates, how do you form that and what does that mean anymore?
Yeah, I think people were just burned out. I think companies, especially public companies who are, are focused entirely on, financial metrics, bottom line, who largely looked at people as numbers. Um, when the recession happened, they started cutting, right? Cutting people, cutting
Hmm?
comp, cutting benefits, even in some cases travel. But guess what? They didn't they didn't cut their revenue goals, right? They increased their revenue goals year over year. So what does that mean? It means if you don't automate, and you don't use technology, you're still people centric, direct correlation between people and productivity. Now all of a sudden you have to get a lot more done with less people. And at some point, you just have burnout, right? And so, you had sent me an article this week about, the kind of resurgence of the WeWork model, right? And that's what I'm seeing too, right? I'm seeing when I do speak to big corporate members, I mean, big guys, right? They're not going, but they've demolished people's offices. You don't have an office. I spoke to somebody, had lunch with somebody a few weeks ago, here in New York. They said, I don't have an office anymore. I work from home 3 days a week. 2 days a week, I go to the office, and it's that 2 days is for meetings, and collaboration. Great idea, right? You work from home 3 days. You get together, so you have like the best of both worlds. You're home, whatever, but you still get out. You still get to the office. You still get to meet with people. You get to do what, I don't know if Google invented it or Apple invented it, but these kind of pods, collaboration, brainstorming pods. He said, you go to the office and it's hot desks. You just
Yeah.
find a desk and you do your work and you meet with people and then you go home. Right? Different model.
Well, it goes back to a book I came out a long time ago. I think it was called The Loyalty Myth. And the author had a really interesting thesis. He said, there for as long as we could remember, there wasn't like goodwill, right, on the balance sheet. There was a value placed on loyalty. Then whether it was consultants or whoever had the broad idea decided that we're going to zero out that line item. Loyalty is almost worthless, in which case it becomes a transactional relationship. His argument in the book was this was a huge mistake. You wrote off something that had tremendous value, and once you did that, then what is the employer? It's a source of income, status if you're lucky, maybe a few other things. The more we go to this sort of virtual model, the more we look more actually more like Upwork, right? Where you go onto Upwork and you say, I'm a designer and I just sit there and take jobs, projects from people. And as long as it's a good person. And the people who I've talked to for research who work on Upwork and love it, what they like about it is that if their boss sucks for a week, they're only suck for a week, right? They walk away and say, well, I'm never working for you again. All right. So I think that's the interesting thing. You really get to this transactional thing. The other thing I find interesting right now is we have right now in the cases of Uber and a few other places, the first generation of algorithmic managers. And the research is starting to come in over the last couple of years on what it's like to work for an algorithm. Because what these companies have done is they've eliminated traditional middle management, right? The customer and the computer manage the base workforce. So based on reviews, 1 star to 5, and the number of crunching that goes on, right? You either had you get rewarded, you're told you were a good employee, or you get punished, you get kicked out the system for 24 hours, whatever happens. So we have this other phenomenon of the more you go remote, the more you go virtual, the more you allow space for a computer to take over the role of management. And that's being pioneered at a couple of different places. And I think this is part of what we expect in the future, that we will see algorithmic management in roles that people today don't imagine, but they're on their way because the systems are being invented and refined at places like Uber and Lyft, and they're learning very quickly.
Yeah, I think it's a factor of experience, right? For a number of years, the priority list of why people took jobs, salary, compensation packages has gone down, further down and down and down that list over the years, right? And I think it's just like a customer. I think on the customer side, I'm a big believer. As many people know who watched me, I'm a big believer in customer experience is the new differentiator. I think loyalty in a lot of areas is dead, right? Your loyalty is as good as your most recent experience with that company. If you bought a particular car for many, many years, like I did, and then you can't get any service, support, or help during your time of need, that loyalty's gone. And I think the same thing is, I spend money on Amazon, not because I love Amazon so much. It's because I do love Amazon so much, but it's because every experience I have reminds me of why I continue to use Amazon. And every experience I have where I purchase something from another place and it's painful reminds me of why did I leave? Why did I buy it there instead of buying it on Amazon like I normally do to save $3.99, right? So, I think loyalty has become, fortunately or unfortunately, people say, isn't that sad? Maybe it's sad. I think it's inevitable. I think it's the reality. I said people are going to buy. You think people are going to stick around? And you know what? I think, unfortunately, I think corporations started this. There was a generation, my parents' generation, my grandfather's generation, where they didn't look elsewhere. I mean, these companies
and that was the point of the loyalty myth. You didn't look because you expected there was reciprocity, right? I don't scan the want ads every day because you're going to make sure that I'm going to be okay.
They trained me. They bought me a house. They built a town around. They look at great companies. I don't want to mention any names, but great companies. There's a few of them in New York that they literally built entire towns for their employees. They gave them houses. They gave them pensions that some of the senior citizens are still living off. Right? Those days are gone. Right? Those companies decided, hey, I'm going to move this somewhere else and save a whole bunch of money. And that's when loyalty died, because these people have said, I thought this company was going to take care of me no matter what. I thought they were going to take care of my wife when I pass away. I thought they were right. All of a sudden, they killed that loyalty.
So where's the bright spot? Because this has been a pretty gloomy
yeah.
conversation. So
here's the good news.
Where's all this then?
Yeah, well, so the good news is, and this is my pitch for the tech space, right? The upside for the workforce and the benefits of technology, automation, and AI have never been better aligned, right? The model has been broken. I think people realize this now. People can work less hours, have more meaning and impact when they do work, and improve their quality of life without sacrificing success or efficiency.
You believe in that promise. You think that it's it sounds a little bit, is it maybe a little bit too optimistic? Because that's for the winners in the model.
You told me I was being too negative. Now I'm being too optimistic.
It's like when outsourcing came, right? And I went to India for the first time, and I met someone who worked at a call center, and I asked, and the company that hired them was in Ohio, and I said, and I asked the person, what do you think happened to the person who lost their job in Ohio, because you have it now here in Bangalore, wherever it was. And the person said, well, I assumed they either got a better job, or now they're home painting or sculpting, or doing what they just wanted to do. I said, that's not the reality. The reality is the person whose job you took probably has a worse job. It's probably what they're facing. Now we don't want to think about that because it's not convenient, right? Because the business depends on the myth of everyone who lost a job in Ohio is now planning rose garden or went back to art school, but that wasn't what really was going on. I think my question is, that's the same thing with AI. Are we saying the world's going to be a better place because of all this? But it will be for a few, but not for most people.
Yeah, I think.
See, you're on the front line every day. What do you see?
Yeah, I think
I
it's.
don't know.
Well, I think there's a couple answers. One answer is it's inevitable, right? So, just like the overused analogy of, we're gonna start using farm equipment instead of farmers, right? Those jobs, it was inevitable. I think. I think it's the wrong. I think, and it's the typical question, but I think it's the wrong question. I think the question is not whether it's right or wrong. I think the question should be, and this ties back to the education conversation we were having, is how do I adapt? How do I change my skill set? How do I, be on top of the next move and prepare, for the next move? Because, by the way, to me, the timing of this is very interesting, right? Because you had all these people. This was a post that I found on LinkedIn last week. There were a lot of when we launched ERPA AI, everybody was, it's going to take people's jobs. Guess what? Turns out those people don't want those jobs, right?
Okay.
You have all these open jobs now, and nobody really wants them. So I think it becomes different jobs. The other thing that is happening is, the jobs are changing. And, for everybody who thinks that AI is taking their job, it's also creating a lot of jobs, right? I was on the phone with a client yesterday. They've got 72 open job recs for AI and data science people. 72. And they're not going to fill them. Guess why? Because there's not 72 out, right? Every company's looking for them. And by the way, when I say 72 data, they're not all like, PhD doctorate people. So some of the roles that they're trying to fill are business analysts who can translate between the business and the data guys, the really geeky guys, right? A lot of people could do that. And it actually makes me think back to, our conversation before and our conversation yesterday, Carlos, of, okay, now I got to look at all those college graduates and figure out who can I train to do that job.
Right.
Who it would be a pivot
thing, right? If you've got these people and, okay, for whatever reason, they made those choices in education, but does that mean they're forever locked out of those 72 jobs that you mentioned? Isn't it worth it for this company to say, listen, if you can pass these certain tests, complete these certain abilities, right, that you can redirect yourself into an AI career, into one of these paths that where the jobs are abundant, and that's probably up to the companies. Maybe it's up to, maybe the schools could offer a 1 year, hey, you're a liberal arts grad, 1 year, there are these things called postbacs, right? So postbac programs are typically 1 year programs where someone wants to do something in graduate school. They exist for the humanities, typically speaking, but you also find them in science. My wife's a scientist, and she has postbacs in her lab. And why isn't there a postbac, or maybe there isn't, I don't know about it, a postbac in AI? So, you majored in history, but your plan is to go do a 1 year hardcore AI postbac. For example, there are postbacs for pre-med. So if you were an English major and you're suddenly deciding you want to go to medical school, you do a postbac program, you take all your organic chemistry, all your hardcore STEM classes, and then you apply to medical school. Maybe the idea of having a math postbac or an AI postbac is as the path after your 4 years of history or English. Then you can go to this person with the 72 openings and qualify for one of those roles. So that's something that we can fix on the educational side, but maybe something that companies can help promote, right? The idea of this 1 or 2 year post undergraduate path that then allows you to join this world where you are, it's a seller's market, right? And you have a whole new set of career paths that you don't have a year earlier. That would be a
Yeah.
positive development, right? That would be a good thing to do.
I think it's exciting. I think, get away from the doom and gloom for a second. I think, regardless of all of the things we've talked about, the power is in the hands of the employee, right? You mentioned Starbucks and Amazon unionizing, right? The power is in the hands of the employees. So the employees now can really dictate what what work should look, what the workplace should look like, right? There was this thing this week about, and they paused it for various reasons, but I mean, California was going to pass a 4-day work week mandate and force companies to pay overtime for people working, more than 32 hours. I mean, I won't get into the politics of that, but that's insane. Like the fact that that's even being considered just shows you, right? I mean, I was in New York City a couple of weeks ago, and I walked about 15 blocks to between meetings, and there were literally 3 people that I could tell were on the phone talking about job interviews, and they were talking about the job interviews like it was a bad date. They were just like, oh, I don't like this, I don't like that, I'm not going to do. They have any choice they want right now. So, if you go in there and we say, let's stop being afraid of technology taking my job because I don't want that job anyway. How can I get a better quality job, which is better? And if you're an employer, listening right now, how can you create an environment where people actually do want to be loyal? They do want to stay. They participate in the gain. If it's a small enough company, maybe the profit of the company. They participate in the growth of the company. They're doing skilled work with the help of there's this concept right now of a digital worker or like a buddy bot that you work with almost symbiotically, that helps you do like the menial stuff you don't like doing in your job, so you can focus on the really high impact work. You have the hybrid work model we talked about. Maybe we even get to that 4-day work week, right? But let's make it a world where instead of being afraid of this, this technology advancement thing, let's embrace it and get people working in jobs that they actually find fulfilling.
I'll make a last point, and there was this study done a long time ago in the UK that looked at worker job satisfaction, and what, if I remember it correctly, the one thing that was the defining factor in whether you like your job or are happy with work was autonomy. To the degree that you felt that the decisions you made were yours, that the world that you had, you shaped, that was the single best leading indicator whether you felt good about your job. And there were people who were very high up in the organization who were miserable because they felt it doesn't matter what I do because my boss will come in tomorrow and change it all. And from my own experience working with C-level executives, I met a whole bunch who hated their job and hated their role because they felt that it didn't matter what they did. The CEO or someone on the board was always going to change it anyway. And I think that to the extent that any manager at any level looks back and say, to what degree can I increase autonomy? And if there's technology that can help me do that, that is one concrete step I think anyone can take to make someone feel better about coming into work, whether they're doing it digitally or physically. Having the feeling that you shape your environment, I think is critical. And if technology helps us do that, then that's a good thing, right?
Yeah, and the last piece, and we're out of time, and I promise to keep this reasonably short so people could actually get back to work and things. But the thing we didn't talk about is people have a lot more options, not just employment options now, but I would say the option to work for yourself. It's a lot easier today than it was when my dad was working to start a business, right? To be an entrepreneur. You talk about the gig economy. Maybe we'll make that our next session, Carlos. But I saw this crazy stat yesterday. 36% of US workers are part of the gig economy. So that person you think is working for you, they're also working for them and for themselves. That's up nearly 70%. And again, that was before the pandemic. So who knows what that number is really like now. So you're not just competing with other employers, you're competing with, I'll sit home and watch Netflix. Although less people seem to be doing that. Netflix is going down. Or people just saying, I want to be my own boss. So, take that.
Well, I divide my work life into, if it all was given to one entity in the past, right? Maybe now you say, well, you get 20%, you get 30%. And I think the younger you are, the more comfortable you are with, quote unquote, taking the block of work hours and apportioning them. Not only does it mean that you probably have a better chance of not having somebody who you don't like as a manager, but also it's a hedge. It's diversifying your own risk, because if you have 3 jobs, right, that one person comes in tomorrow and says, well, sorry, you're done. It's not as bad as if this is the only thing.
Like next.
There might be just some intrinsic risk management going on, all right, in the generation that says, I'm happier knowing that I'm hedged and I've de-risked my work portfolio from just one stock to a few.
Yeah. This has been great. Carlos, thank you, buddy. This was fun. We're doing this every week, guys. And, like I said, this is new. So if you have any comments, feedback, criticism, I can take criticism. Carlos, can you take criticism?
Take criticism.
I can take. So let us know how we're doing. And let us know what we should talk about. Again, the goal is the intersection of, business, technology, and humanities. And the goal is to make you a better digital leader. So let us know what we can talk about, what we can do. We'll have some guests joining us over the coming weeks. And like I said, we'll be on the podcast platforms, but see us live every Wednesday, 3:00 Eastern. Carlos, thank you.
For joining.
Looking forward to this one, buddy.
I appreciate it. Great seeing you, Dan. Have a great week.